So I'm very honored to speak at the third Lean Summit in France. Congratulations on another record audience, and an audience that I'm sure is really hungry to take Lean further. What we have noticed over the last few years is that Lean really has spread everywhere, and pretty well every major organization in the world now has some kind of Lean program. And over the last few years, we have been focusing our efforts on understanding Lean as a management or a business or a leadership system to enable the value creation work that we are familiar with to flow as it should. So I want to summarize in 10 slides my current reflections on thinking about Lean as a management system. So I have been talking with Michael Ballet for quite some time about trying to distill these ideas down into a few slides, and Michael provoked me to do this into less than 10 slides. I managed only 10 slides. I think Michael's current talk is 7.5 slides. So if this works, Michael needs to take some credit for this. If this presentation doesn't work, then it's entirely my fault. The strength of the Lean movement, without a doubt, and the reason the Lean movement has become the predominant improvement methodology globally now, is because we have Toyota as a reference model. And if we reflect on the power of Toyota as a reference model, it really is because Toyota created a unique operational synthesis of 3 fundamental improvement streams today. The first of those streams was the quality movement, which actually Toyota came late to the quality movement, taking not just the statistical analysis of variance, but much more significant, embodying the scientific method, the plan, do, check, act discipline, not only in how we solve problems, but in how we think and organize the way we decide which problems to tackle in management. So the PDCA really was operationalized by Toyota. At the same time, and before the quality movement came to Toyota, Toyota was fundamentally exploring the ideas of organizing the value creation process in process sequence. Thinking end-to-end, thinking about the value-creating work and linking the value-creating work with the customer. And the stream of thinking has led to focusing not just on value streams, on the creation of individual products, but actually managing all of the support activities and management systems necessary to make that value creation process work. So now our focus is really on managing value systems. And the third stream is fundamental and didn't originate in Toyota. It originated in the Training Within Industry program developed by the US government during the Second World War to train women to replace men who went off to fight, to run the munitions factories, to provide the armaments. That was a unique program of learning by doing that was really a leap ahead of anything we had seen before, and formed the basis of Toyota, of Taiichi Ohno's teaching methods later on after the Second World War. So this is a unique synthesis of the use of the scientific method. It was a unique synthesis of industrial engineering and more recently systems design, systems engineering, systems thinking, and a combination also with learning by doing, which is really the insights initially from psychology, but increasingly now also from neuroscience. You can also see these 3 things in terms of establishing the purpose. The scientific method, the PDCA focus in management helps us establish the purpose of the enterprise. The end-to-end perspective enables us to create the processes to deliver that purpose, and the learning by doing foundation enables us to run those processes effectively and efficiently to deliver that purpose. So I think that threefold synthesis and integration into a management system is actually the unique contribution that Toyota has made and the foundation on which the Lean movement has been built. Lean starts, of course, with the value-creating work the customer is paying for, the value stream, as we call it. This may be a value stream starting with a sales department. It might then be a design and engineering department. It might then be a planning, production scheduling department. It might be then operations, and it might be logistics. Each of those activities necessary to create the value the customer is paying for. And this is very typical, that several different departments have to actually perform their work correctly and in the right sequence in order to deliver that value to the customer. So that's what we call the value stream, and that's where everything starts. The entire management system is built to enable that value stream to flow, that value stream to deliver the value the customers are paying for. Now, each activity itself needs, of course, to be managed at the Gemba. Be managed in terms of creating the stability necessary to manage the work, to be able to see the deviations from the planned work and to respond to those, and to tackle root cause analysis of persistent problems that are occurring that prevent the work being done as planned. So that's what I would call fundamental Gemba management. Happens at the Gemba, needs to be responsive to the Gemba on a very, very frequent cadence. The second level, very important level, is the level where we deepen knowledge and we deploy knowledge in a consistent manner across the organization in functions. And we allocate resources in functions. And Toyota is as vertically organized as any other organization, because that is the right way of deploying knowledge and deploying resources. But Toyota has also found a way of linking and creating a value stream management of the entire value creation process, the integration, in this case, of the 5 separate activities, 5 separate departments. And the chief engineer role is the model for a role that carries enormous responsibility for the integration of those functions, but does not carry the authority over the resources necessary to accomplish this. And managing this separation of authority and responsibility and the collaboration of everybody in the right context, that is the essential task of middle management, to deepen functional skills and to integrate the workflow that crosses all of those vertical functions. And at the top, the task of management is very clear. It is about establishing the true north, establishing the needs of the organization to survive, the needs of its customers that we need to fulfill in order for the organization to have purpose. So providing direction and focus is absolutely a vital task at the top of the organization. Now, linking those, the middle layer, their job is essentially to provide direction, if you like, and enable the value creation work to be done in the right sequence, in the right way, in the right time, for an integration of those tasks to create the value for the customer. So essentially, their role is an enabling role. The role from the top is actually a discussion and a debate to align the plans of the functions and the department with the needs of the organization as seen from the top perspective, looking at the rest of the organization in its commercial context. So here we have a very crude sketch of the different tasks at the different levels that a management system has to accomplish. And on the right-hand side, I've indicated a few of the key tools, very few out of a huge toolbox of management tools that are key to making this work. And I want to take each of those and talk a bit about them in turn. Now let's start, of course, with defining value, which is actually a slippery a slippery subject, and one in which we need to think carefully in order to define it correctly. There is value clearly for the customer. We are trying to solve the customer's problem. Whether it's a financial problem, whether it's a product problem, whether it's any other kind of problem, a health problem. So clearly, value is defined from the customer's perspective in the work we do for the customer. Value also has to deliver results for the organization. And the sequence, I think, is important to be clear that Lean works from. It starts with good products, designed well and executed well. So high quality, the right products, generates growth and customer satisfaction. But those are individual activities to perform each of the necessary tasks correctly in the right sequence. Having done that, having been able to perform all of the tasks correctly, we can begin then to link those tasks together and remove all the unnecessary bottlenecks and queues and delays in the process and begin to create flow. So actually, quality enables us to begin to flow. As we flow, we're able to eliminate unnecessary inventories, unnecessary delays, unnecessary wasted activities, and all of the other wastes that we know about from Taiichi Ohno. That saves the organization cash, and it saves the organization unnecessary capital expenditure to buy that additional warehouse, to buy that additional piece of equipment that now actually you may not need because you've freed up time on the machine, you've freed up space, etc., etc. So saving cash and capital for the organization, and improving the flow of value creation and the responsiveness of the value creation process also leads to greater customer satisfaction and growth. Focusing on time also has an impact on cost and on margins, particularly on cost. Preserve our margins at all costs, but to focus on reducing the unnecessary costs in the process. And that, of course, has a direct impact on cost to the customer, which also has a direct impact back on growth and customer satisfaction. And having saved cash, and in particular having saved capital, we are then free to invest that capital in next generation products. So focusing on quality and then time, the consequence is that we lower costs, rather than focusing initially on costs, as most people do, and then somehow hoping that quality and time will be impacted. That's the wrong sequence. The right sequence is quality, and then time, and then cost, and then new products. So that is a framework for defining value for the customer and defining the results necessary for the organization's survival. At the top of the organization, my experience, this is a fuzzy process that most top managers are not so familiar with. And actually the traditional strategy deployment process does not use the vital few, does not use PDCA thinking in boiling down the high-level objectives of the organization into the vital few things the organization needs to focus on that will have the biggest impact both on customer value and on results for the organization. If we can focus on and identify the vital few and deselect all of the other things that happen, then we can not only be much more effective, but we have much greater confidence that the results are going to be delivered and the organization is going to achieve its aims. Now, in my experience in this process, the first step is defining the high-level objectives, where possible in a measurable form in terms of a gap. But before defining the gaps, let's also look at the interdependencies, bearing in mind the sequence I talked about before, about getting it right first, and then linking it, focusing on time, and then focusing on cost. Because the power of time in a lean system is the power that links all of these things together. And typically, as you do this focusing exercise, you recognize that if we focus on time, it will reveal all of the other issues, and it will address all of the other issues. Whereas if we just focus on cost, that won't necessarily have an impact on quality. If we just focus on quality, it won't necessarily have an impact on cost. Time is the integrating factor here. So time and time again, focusing on seeing the value creation process through the time perspective is actually the key. Having done that, then we can define the performance gaps that are most critical to achieving the objectives of the organization. And then we're ready to have a deployment discussion, a traditional Hoshin catchball process, down the organization to take those gaps and ask each layer to think about what activities they could contribute towards closing those gaps. So we have a catchball dialogue to actually focus activities on the vital few gaps that will make the biggest difference to the organization. And then down in the mid-level of the organization, we can identify which value streams are broken in what places and what interventions in those value streams we need to take to have the biggest effect on the higher level goals. So at the top, this is a critical process that is often not done well. And the consequence is that you go into many organizations and ask how many projects do they have ongoing, and if you put them on the wall, as we've done recently in a hospital, and discovered 515 projects and 350 targets that are being reviewed every month, you know that management has no oversight of the vital few and has no ability to deselect all the unnecessary projects that are consuming resources but won't deliver results. And in the end, what you find is just overburdened management chasing projects. And that is something I see time and time again. What I also see are lots of good organizations with Six Sigma experts running around doing projects, lots and lots of projects everywhere that are totally disconnected, that are not focused on the overall goal, business problems of the organization. So we have to be much more effective in deploying our resources. And that's where a very different leadership style, instead of the style of you do this, or I don't care how you do it, just meet the target, that has to be replaced by a leadership style which is about this is where we need to go, this is how we together need to work to achieve that objectives. What John Shook calls a follow me leadership style. So that's at the top of the organization. The job at the middle of the organization used to be, let us map our processes. But increasingly, we need to map the whole system. In this case, this is an automotive component delivered to an American, in this case, an American automaker, in which the company took the component and broke it down into the constituent parts and mapped each of the parts back through all of the steps that it takes right back to the foundries. And this is very, very typical. This example is described in the new version of Seeing the Whole, which we call Seeing the Whole Value Stream. It's an actual example of an automotive component. And all we've done, in this case, simplified diagram of what Toyota would do on a big wall, plotting for each subcomponent going back to raw materials, all of the steps, all of the quality at each step, on-time delivery at each step, inventories at each point in the process, following the timeline going back through each of the processes. So we now can see the whole value system. I've just put the timeline on here just to make it easier to read. Seeing this as a production system, we can now see the logic behind this. The logic behind this system, as with the design of many automotive supply chains and aerospace supply chains, was based upon focus factories, concentrate activities in one place for all kinds of products, and low-cost sourcing. You can see this component is made partly in China, partly in Japan, partly in Mexico, partly in Spain, partly in Europe, in Germany, France, Italy, and the UK. And you can see that this part travels thousands more miles probably being made than it will actually in use, which is kind of interesting to think about. And we find exactly the same in the aerospace industry. So Having mapped the entire value system on the wall, we can see what was wrong with the logic that designed it. We can see also that actually it's questionable whether the low-cost sourcing actually delivered results. And what it's led to, in this case, is enormously long supply chains. 30 up to 90 weeks supply chains. Now that is roughly 200 up to 600 days long. A responsive supply chain? So anyhow, having seen this system problem here, we can then, of course, focus in on tackling those plants which have a long throughput time, for instance. We can tackle those suppliers where we have to hold a lot of raw material inventory because we can't be sure that they will deliver on time. We can tackle the transport links, which again are full of unpredictabilities, and the inventories either end to protect us. And we can focus on the planning system. This is a weekly schedule system. And we can also focus on many other aspects of this system. We can question a lot of product design decisions that were made that fitted this model of how you were going to produce it. And this is a real example, and we watched as this company fundamentally changed its entire global location strategy at the basis of this analysis. And for the next generation product, actually a slightly more complicated product, they redesigned the product, redesigned the production system, redesigned the location. So practically everything, all but one special steel, were made in factories in process sequence within the region of sale. So instead of 90 weeks, we're talking about sort of 24 days. In fact, we now know they have improved the throughput of this process in the last couple of years as this has been operational, and the fastest lead time is now 5 days into the entire system. Daily replenishment loops, eliminated all the long-distance sourcing, apart from one product. It is a completely different production system, vastly more responsive, and we're talking days and not months and years. And here's the evidence. This is actually a slightly more complicated component with more variance. It takes slightly longer to make, 13.5 hours or 13.3 hours instead of 10.5 hours. Lead times are vastly shorter, and instead of something like 22% of costs eaten up by inventories, transport, and air freight, and so on, we're talking about 5 or 6%. Easily offsets the higher labor costs of making closer to customers. So this kind of leap can only happen if you've done the prior analysis of the existing value system to see what was wrong with it and understand the failure of the logic that led to its design. Having done that, then this is the big win. This is the big benefit. And undoubtedly, this is better, faster, cheaper, and closer to customers. And you could repeat this analysis for many, many, many other supply systems. So this is just one example. In doing this kind of value system analysis, and digging down to the system, the causes of system disturbance, of which waste is a symptom. Waste is a symptom of deeper overburden and deeper variation, system variation. If we don't actually understand the causes of system variation, then we're actually unlikely to really make a big fundamental difference to the design of the operation of the current system and the design of the next generation system. Now, each type of process, in our experience, has different starting points and different lessons that it teaches us, many of which are relevant to all the other processes, but are key to getting the right starting point. The auto industry, we've learned clearly that the establishment of standard work and the ability then to link that work together into flow is absolutely fundamental. So creating stability and then flow and so on, that's absolutely at the core of the lessons we've learned from the auto industry. In the process industry, very different. There you have a vast range of products, very different types of volumes going through the common equipment. And here the trick, the insight, is to not try and design a system for everything. And design a system for the 5% of products that account for 50% of the volume. Kind of Pareto is obvious. Let's design around the core flows and treat the tail separately. Not let the tail interrupt and dictate the whole way in which we schedule everything. Exactly the same analysis we've used looking in hospitals at the patient flows. Any complex flow, you need to separate the high volume and focus on improving the flow of high volume, and then deal with the long tail of lower volume products. Key insight. From the retail industry, I have a long experience with Tesco in this. The key is actually being able to understand the ability of the retailer to supply the complete basket of goods the customer is looking for, what we call basket fulfillment. Exactly the same as you're servicing a car. You need exactly all of the parts, you need the work planned, you need the ability to execute correctly. So basket fulfillment and then rapid replenishment loops upstream, that is absolutely key to designing a retail system. In a service business, a service repair business, the key is then to have a dialogue with customers or dialogue with the product, which is possible now having self-reporting products like aero engines, to turn unpredictable work into predictable work. It's absolutely key to being able to then manage the disassembly and the reassembly process in a service business. In construction, we've learnt the key is actually specifying the design up front. The business model in the past certainly incentivizes not fully specifying the building, because actually everybody makes money on the changes. And that has driven a sloppy design that then ends up with lots of rework and being late and everybody suing each other. And the key to turning that around, in our experience, is actually for a determined customer to actually think through the design that will then not change, that then makes the assembly and the manufacturing, the fabrication and assembly of the building a much, much simpler process. In healthcare, the key, in my view, is partly sieving the patients, but also actually making the plan of work visible. Because healthcare depends on the input from many, many support activities to enable the patient to get through the process and to leave. And in no hospital is that plan of work visible. Without the plan of work visible, how can you schedule, how can you sequence and synchronize any of those support activities? So that's the heart of the problem in healthcare, is the work is not visible. And not agreed, let alone visible. In government, I'm increasingly seeing that many different government departments are often key to solving a problem of a consumer of these resources, a long-term unemployed or a homeless person, or somebody needing different packages of support. And the key is actually the coordination of those different activities around the needs of the patient. And the patient and the customer is actually the integrator of most of those activities. And so that turns out to be key in service delivery in government. And in finance and finance administration, a similar issue. Actually, they're supplying all of the inputs necessary for me to coordinate and optimize the solution using those inputs to solve my problem. But in most admin processes, because they're broken, they generate a lot of what Toyota calls created demand, unnecessary demand, which we then try and automate or to meet, instead of understanding and eliminating the created demand in order to design a system to meet real demand. And in the software industry, I think we are learning very interesting from the Lean IT initiative that Marie-Pierre has taken. We're learning about the power of going back to the basics of designing rapid experiments, automated testing, and immediate feedback. Google doing daily release instead of 6-month software release is exactly a case in point. So every organization actually is a collection of these different types of processes, many of these different types of processes. And we need to recognize different starting points are key to tackling these different problems. Let me just end with 2 more slides. The sequence. If you're in the auto industry, you may want to reverse this sequence because, in fact, you're dealing with already a much more stable situation. But in the industries I've described, the ability to sieve, separate the high volume, to deal with the actual volume products, and then to link them and begin to see the disconnect between them, and then begin to work on where to create stability and flow in order to correctly pull. That actually is the precursor to creating stability and is really the foundation of the work. And the manifestation of that is the visual plan versus actual, which is fundamental both in product development and engineering as well as in production. And the right context for teamwork to happen, particularly cross-functional teamwork where you're designing whole value streams, and Kaizen. And at the heart of this is a standard work for managers. It's a standard work for managers to achieve 2 objectives. First, to enable the work. The point of management is to enable the value creation process to flow. And on the other hand, to develop the capabilities of the people running the process to respond to problems, to root cause, problem solve, and so on. So there are always those 2 aspects to management, enabling the work and developing the capabilities of the people to do it. And that is the heart of Fujio Cho's summary of his management principles of going to sea, respecting the people who are doing the work and appreciating their perspective on the actual work as opposed to my perspective on the context of the work, and then asking the right questions to provoke the answers, to provoke the thought process amongst colleagues, to dig down to why is this happening? What is this a symptom of? What are the actions that we might take to perform to address these problems? So asking why rather than telling people what to do is actually a foundation. And underneath this, we have 3 extraordinarily important pillars of knowledge that have been articulated in the last few years. There's the whole A3 analysis, the embodiment of the PDCA process in the thought process that every manager all the way down the organization needs to learn. It's actually the way Toyota teaches managers and employees how to think, by a dialogue around an A3 in problem-solving proposal activity. Fundamental, Managing to Learn is the book that you need to read to understand the power of the dialogue of A3 thinking to teach people how to think. And then there's practicing that, which is what Mike Rother's Kata book is all about. Toyota Kata is all about how do we practice, we act our way into a new way of thinking through practice, through a disciplined way of setting objectives and working through the process to achieving those objectives. And the 3rd pillar is the one I mentioned before, the TWI Learning by Doing Foundation. That is absolutely fundamental to designing work, to making work flow, and to making work productive. And John Shook summarizes the power of all of this is that actually learning is the work. That is the unique part of this system, is that we have recombined the thinking, which we previously gave to experts, and the doing. We are recombining those into everybody thinking and doing. So actually, we are making people at the same time as we're making products, which is a phrase you will often hear from Toyota. My last slide. Think about this as managers. How do managers actually use their time? And when are they actually adding value? Not easy to determine. When does a decision happen that actually has an impact on the value creation process? And I'll leave you with 5 questions to think about in relation to that. First, are we really able to focus on the vital few and have the confidence to deselect all of those other unnecessary activities? So we actually stop doing unnecessary things. Are we able to redesign the way we manage projects, the way we review production operations, through visual, frequent stand-up project reviews, that save us a huge amount of unnecessary time in meetings? How do we create stability in our operations through establishing good Gemba management that enables us to eliminate a lot of firefighting and emails, in order to be able to spend more time to develop the capabilities of our subordinates, by mentoring A3s and by Gemba learning, and to prepare to meet new challenges, to design the next generation products, the next generation production systems, and the next sorts of business models in the era of the web that will meet new challenges that are coming from customers, from web-enabled customers. So think about that. We have as big a job in improving the effectiveness of management, the efficiency and effectiveness of management, as we do of improving the effectiveness of the shop floor. Those are my thoughts on management in 10 slides.